Hi, I'm Fran Costigan, and I'm here to welcome you to the Essential Vegan Desserts live event today at Rouxbe. And today is Galentine's Day, actually. I don't know how that came to be. If anybody knows and wants to put it in the chat, let me know. But it is February 13th, Galentine's Day, the day before Valentine's Day, which is tomorrow. So I want to wish everybody who celebrates a happy Galentine's Day. And for people who are celebrating the Chinese New Year, some of my friends are, happy Chinese, happy prosperous year, healthy to all who celebrate. Now, I'm really excited about today's topic. I've got some nice photos to show you and also some real life desserts to talk about. I think there will be something for every manner of eater. You know, you don't have to be vegan to enjoy vegan food, plant-based food, as long as it's delicious. Food should be delicious and suit your particular dietary, excuse me, consideration. So before I get started, I like to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question to ask me, I'm not going to hear you, but on the right side of the screen is a box where you can put your question in, and I will get to the questions and hope to answer them. If I can't answer a particular question, I'll get back to you. I would like everyone to know that they can feel free to send an email to me at fran@rouxbe.com. I want to welcome everyone who's here today, guests and students, and particularly my students in the Essential Vegan Desserts course, both the new students, those in process, and students who have completed the course. If you haven't already joined our private Essential Vegan Desserts Facebook group, please do that. And if you are putting photos on social media, Instagram, for example, hashtag Essential Vegan Desserts and Rouxbe Plants, so we can find you. Anyone who is doing a Rouxbe course that is having and has, you know, some kind of a technical problem that happens from time to time. My friend Sharon Nolan, a very close friend of mine and Rouxbe instructor, we have a little hashtag thing going on. It's always something when it comes to tech. And so you can write to support@rouxbe.com and somebody will get back to you from our stellar team. Now, obviously, I should be obvious. I have written a couple of vegan dessert cookbooks. I developed the Essential Vegan Desserts at Rouxbe. I used to teach a vegan baking boot camp. Yes, I like desserts. This is true. Also, over my shoulder, I have a whole open cabinet of beans. I eat beans and greens and grains and all kinds of plant foods because you can't live on desserts, but we can enjoy desserts as treats. I have always preferred smaller portions of desserts or smaller desserts in general. Actually, the first few bites to me are the most important one. Again, I want them to be absolutely delicious, but I feel the same way about Valentine's Day. I think that a small plate of desserts that is presented beautifully, we eat with our eyes, is the way to go. For me, I am not you, so you can decide. I've got some desserts to show you. I pulled out my Baccarat champagne flute. I only have 2 left out of 12 because I lent them to a neighbor in New York and they all got broken. But I have a really interesting wine jelly that I made because I also don't like waste. And there was a bottle of bubbly rosé that hadn't been finished. So I did some little things to it. I added some ingredients and I have this beautiful wine jelly now. I'm going to see how it holds in the little bit of wine that's left over. But first, I would like to look at some photos that I sent to Patrick. The first one you're going to see is a photo from the Essential Vegan Desserts course. It is an individual baked Alaska. So if there's anybody here who doesn't know what baked Alaska is, typically it's a piece of cake. It can be a big, dessert for many people. It's cake and ice cream, sometimes a sauce, and then meringue. Because we have aquafaba meringue available to us as vegans, now we can make this really wonderful dessert. I tend to like the individual ones. If I'm having a lot of company, I will do a long log, for example. But one of the beauties of this dessert is that it can be made ahead and kept in your freezer completely, and then you can torch the meringue just before you're ready to serve. So baked Alaska was something that was a staple in my house before I was vegan, and this is more than 30 years ago, because it was my son's favorite dessert. Now, one of the things about this is I am absolutely vegan. I am not gluten-free. So I do not make gluten-free desserts for everyone, but take that word everyone when I don't know who's going to be in the group that I'm going to be serving. I do assume there will be people who are gluten-free. So these, where is it? Gluten-free brownie that I make fits the bill. It doesn't taste gluten-free to me at all, or it certainly didn't to any of my tasters. And what I did was I dipped this. They stay in the freezer. They stay fudgy, which is important if I'm going to be doing an ice cream dessert that has to live in the freezer. And then I dipped it in ganache. I'm going to do a couple different things with ganache today. And I put some ganache in the little hole in a raspberry to make something that is small look bigger to me. And it's just absolutely delicious. The next dessert we're going to look at is a small tart. And, I have tart-shaped individual pans. This is a nice little tart ring. You put your dough around the side and in the bottom, and then you can make any filling. You bake it if it's a pastry dough, or we can make tarts with pressed crust. There are two different kinds that come to mind, and one is one that will be baked. It's usually nuts, sometimes oats, some fat, and sometimes sweetener, and they get pressed into a tart pan with a removable bottom and baked and cooled and then filled. However, we can also make raw-ish tarts, which work for people who are following a whole food plant-based, no oil diet by using dried fruit dates, for example, get nice and sticky in a food processor. You can add some oats, you can add some nuts, and just press those. In terms of the filling, the sky's the limit. Well, maybe not the sky, but there are so many options. So right here, I have some cashews soaking to make a cashew cream, which is something that I love to do. And I love the cashew cream that's in the course is set with agar powder and agar powder, and originally with some guar gum, which also thickens. For people who cannot use a gum, you just use more agar powder and you just run the blender. Here we want a high-speed blender until it boils, because agar needs to come to a boil in order to set. Agar, for people, if there's anybody here who doesn't know what agar is, it's vegetable gelatin. It's like using Knox gelatin or bovine gelatin, but it is derived from sea vegetables and is perfectly safe, has been used for millennia. So I actually made a couple of desserts today to show you that are agar based. It's colorless. I don't think it has any calories, and when made properly, there's no flavor. There are 3 forms of agar. There's powder, flakes, and bars. I don't really know anybody who uses the bars anymore. When I was a pastry chef at Angelica Kitchen, we used bars to make our cantons, which are gelled fruit desserts. Today we can use flakes or powder, and they aren't interchangeable. The powder has more strength, about 4 to 5 times as strong as the flakes. You can also make a cream with tofu as a base. So this is silk. This is a silken tofu in an aseptic container. It doesn't have to be refrigerated until it's open. Here I would just wash the top of the container, open it, tip out the water, and get started. And then add flavorings and some sweetening. You can top your tarts with all kinds of things, fruits, fruit forward. I like a small dessert and the plate filled out with fruit, anything that you wish, but they're a lovely thing to make. Depending on your crust, you might not want to fill your tart with the cream until close to serving time because we don't want a soggy bottom. But you can waterproof the bottom of your tart with jam or with chocolate, and that works really well. The next photo is a cocoa gel heart that was made with agar, the agar that I'm talking about. I'm actually going to show you. It's in this drawer. So this particular brand is from Modernist Pantry, and it's super agar, so it's quite strong. Supermarket, I see agar powder and agar flakes almost anywhere. But here I've made a gel that was chocolate based, both with agar and a starch slurry. So that in this recipe, a recipe like this would be either arrowroot or cornstarch. That makes it a little softer and creamier. And it's there is no fat in a dessert like that, except for the minimal fat that might be in your cocoa powder. So that's a nice dessert to build on. Now, these are the wine jellies that I made. Whoops, I don't want it on my computer. So I think I had 2 cups of sparkling rosé left. I tasted it, had been in my refrigerator for a while, and I hadn't done the, pulling the air out of it. It didn't taste great. It didn't taste awful. If it was awful, then you can't make something delicious when the food is spoiled. I added to the 2 cups of wine, I added 2 tablespoons of vegan cane sugar. I added I added strips of orange because I thought that would be really nice, and some rosemary. I like using herbs and spices in my desserts. And I infused the liquid for a period of time, tasted it, liked it, strained it. And then, of course, when you're infusing liquid, you're going to lose some of the liquid, so you would do an adjustment. I didn't need to because this was a test and I was only going to do 1 cup. And I added the agar, and then I did a test. So I recommend that you do a test to put a little bit of the gel or frosting or whatever you're making in a small container, put it in your refrigerator for 5 or 10 minutes, and then is it too firm for what you'd like. Is it too soft? So if it's too soft, you're going to add a little more agar. If it's too firm, you're going to add a little bit more of the liquid. Now, I have had these in the fridge for a couple of days and they hold. Agar sets a little bit differently from bovine gelatin that you may be used to using, because it will set at room temperature and it stays firm for a longer period of time without weeping. You need to learn to use it properly. Once you do, it's a literal piece of cake. And we have a whole unit on using agar in essential vegan desserts because it's really important. I started using it when I was a pastry chef at Angelica Kitchen. One of our most popular desserts, probably our most popular dessert, was a simple Canton. You may know the word Canton, Katan, and it just is a gelled fruit dessert. So I'm going to take some of these little, I've got in my flute, I have some pomegranate seeds. I seeded a pomegranate and I didn't use them all, so I put them in the freezer and it turns out that was just fine. And I'm going to put these jellies into my flute. You can see that would be pretty. I could stop there and just add some cream or some more pomegranate raspberries, but this is what I have left of my wine. And I think that this is a lovely dessert. It's a treat. Now, for people who aren't drinking wine, you do the very same thing with a fruit juice. I use a no sugar added fruit juice. This looks really great. Kathy Gold, if you're here, come up after my live. Chef Kathy Gold lives 2 floors below me. And we share food often. So I also did a different shape of, you can do all different kinds of shapes. And then I poured some just into a flat dish. And I cut this heart, which is really nice and would be nice on a cake or as part of a fruit plate, for example. I also have, this is a chocolate orange tahini truffle filling that I cut with a heart-shaped cutter into a heart, and that could be part of a dessert. That recipe is in the Q&A for you with what I did to make it different from, I adapted the recipe a little bit. So the next dessert is called a mendiant, which sounds pretty fancy, but it's just chocolate poured out neatly, and then bits of, you can use cacao nibs, you can use bits of nuts, you can use bits of dried fruit, and it's a lovely, lovely dessert. Better to make them with tempered chocolate, but you really can just make them with a nice high percentage chocolate, melted very carefully, and they look great. They look great and they taste great. And again, this can be your one dessert or it can be part of a platter. Then, of course, we want to have some cookies. So I've got a photo here of cookies from the course that I just absolutely love these cookies. We're all different. I like crunchy cookies. These are thin and crunchy and are made with all liquid sweeteners. It took me a long time to figure this recipe out. Actually, there's a whole story. It was a mistake made by one of my interns when I was teaching at the Natural Gourmet, but we kind of went backwards and reverse engineered the cookie. So that's a really nice thing. This particular cookie bends when it's warm. So one of the assignments in Essential Vegan Desserts is to make this particular cookie and show me the cookie being shaped. And it has to be shaped while it's warm, but they cool very quickly. So it's a matter of going in and out of the oven. However, they stay crispy in your freezer for a long time and defrost in seconds. And the last dessert is a parfait, because there are many of us who like fruit, and I've got some raspberries and strawberries on my counter today. This is very unusual for me because I like to eat seasonally. So this time of the year, for me, it's really going to be pomegranate seeds. It's going to be glazed cranberries. It's going to be oranges, blood oranges. But I did see some organic berries today and I got them. So those are the desserts. And I want to show you, I'm just going to have to walk away for a minute. That's why I have that's why Rouxbe got me a nice wireless mic. So this is ganache that was in my freezer. It defrosted beautifully. And I'm just going to pour it into a pretty little dish. Now, maybe it is because I like smaller desserts that I have a number of pretty little dishes, but I made this plate just to give you an example. This would be a nice plate to share with someone. I've got fresh fruit. I've got the strawberry. I have a dried blood orange, actually, dates, pitted, which are sweet. Some of you may know that Char Nolan, Chef Char, your instructor at Rouxbe, and my dear friend, the two of us love prunes. And prunes today are known as dried plums, but we still call them prunes. Those brownies that I showed you actually have prune puree in them. And so I could treat this, or you could treat this if you made this, as a dessert for two, like a fondue with chocolate ganache. So I've got a little fig here. I have a half of a medjool date that I did dip in some ganache earlier, and then sprinkled some cacao nibs on it. I've got apricots, dried apricots. They're dark in color because I don't buy the ones that are sulfur added. So this would be a nice fondue. And I also have dried mango here and a piece of a smaller piece. I don't think you'll be able to see it because it's on my black gloves, of that ganache that I made. So this is something, if you don't want to make a fondue using a ganache, and ganache, for anyone here who doesn't know, is a percentage of chocolate, a percentage of plant milk, usually a nice rich plant milk, mixed in a proper way. Chocolate can be a little temperamental. A chocolate that tastes good to you right out of the package, or you're not going to like it. If you don't want to do that, you can make a date and nut butter or tahini type dip, and that would be a nice thing to have as well. I want to grab the ice cream that I have in the freezer, and then I'm going to start answering some questions. So if you haven't sent a question in yet, feel free to do that. So I did this earlier. Same little container. I've got a brownie in there, and this ice cream is actually made with the cashew cream that we make in the course. I'm not kidding when I say cashew cream can taste like ice cream. And I did a date caramel and swirled it in. I have a new ice cream maker. It's the Ninja Creme. I have a real professional ice cream maker, a CMAC, that's really big and really heavy and only needs to be plugged in and ready to go. So I'm going to gild this lily. I did not make aquafaba, but I do have this ganache. And I can just drizzle it right on here. And I think I didn't chop these walnuts, so I'm just going to kind of break them because we don't want giant nuts, but you can really plump this out. I've got some raspberries here. I've got some bananas, so you can make yourself a nice little sundae, and that's not a very big dessert, but it's enough. It really is enough. I want to show you, this is a double recipe of the ganache, which you have of the truffle recipe that you have in the Q&A, but I poured it out into a flat dish. This was in the freezer. I tested it, of course, to make sure that the consistency was correct, and I cut them into shapes. I like to, if I'm making them for a crowd, and why not, because they can stay in your freezer for a long time, I like to cut them into squares, but you can also roll them. So I'm sure, oh, here you go. Here's one that was rolled, and it can be dipped in sesame seeds and ready to go. Delicious. And they stay nice at room temperature for a while. So I'm going to take off my gloves now. I'm looking at that flute of wine with wine jelly and going, that's going to be good. I think that'll be yummy later. This is interesting. This is not dessert, but if there is anybody who likes wine and isn't in a household or a situation where you want to have a lot, this is a can. It's called Sophia. And it's just terrific. And it comes with these cute little straws. I generally make my agar gels and beverages with fruit juice. So let me get over to the questions now. They're here. I have to find them on my computer. All right. Let's see. Doug wants to know what's the best plant-based fat used in baking to achieve fluffy pastry. So that's a good question, Doug, because there are a couple of different fats available to vegan to plant-based bakers. They are liquid fats, and those are oils. The oils that I use are extra virgin olive oil, unless I want the flavor for an olive oil cake, for example. I use a neutral flavored one. The other oils that I use are sunflower, which to me almost tastes buttery, and grapeseed. When you are looking at a recipe and converting it from a solid fat like butter to a liquid fat, you only use 7/8 of the amount, because the liquid fat is 100% fat. And I'm using the word fat because it's fat without the milk solids in butter. Now, that liquid fats were the only thing that were available to me 30 years ago when I was working as a pastry chef. And, I had trained traditionally and then was hired to work in a vegan pastry kitchen. They did have a solid fat, but it was hydrogenated margarine, and we know today that's very unhealthful, but also smelled and tasted awful. So I developed my recipes using oil. Depends what you're going, the answer is dependent on what it is you're going to be making, Doug. So if you're making a buttercream, for example, or a laminated dough, you're going to use stick vegan butter, and they're different one from the other. You don't want to use the spreads. There's too much liquid. I will say that there was a live event I did going back some time, and you can all go into the live event library and find lots of information. but I lined up different plant butters. I had Earth Balance, I had Miyoko's, I probably had BioLife or Flora at the time, and just watched them at room temperature. And some of them melted into a puddle and others held. So if you're going to be doing laminated doughs, you want a strong vegan butter. Like BioLife is one that I use a lot. I find Miyoko's very melty. And someone told me recently, a chef told me recently, that the vegan butter at Trader Joe's is very good, but I haven't used it, so I don't know. I can't speak to that. Okay, Myra has a question. Well, she has a conundrum here. She says, I try to avoid eating added sugar, but my husband really misses the crispy bite sugar gives to things as cookies. How do I make a crunchy and sweet cookie without added sugar? So, Myra, that's definitely a situation. It's hard to do. Now, I did say that the cookie that I showed was made with a combination of maple syrup and rice syrup. Rice syrup tends to make things hard when it's used in a particular way. I don't recommend using it for cakes. It makes them, they tend to bake gummy, and the flavor is off. But in combination in this cookie, it's a very thin cookie. I got a crispy cookie. But that's really a problem because it is granulated sugar, typically white sugar, which we don't use at all in essential vegan desserts. That creates crisper cookies. And some of you may know that if you use brown sugar, for example, which is cane sugar with the molasses intact, or when it isn't organic brown sugar, it's cane sugar, white sugar with the molasses sprayed back on, then you're going to get a chewier cookie because there's more moisture in that sugar. I use coconut sugar in place of brown sugar most of the time, and that also has more moisture. So you have to be careful. Recipes without eggs, which is no problem for me since I've been baking this way for a very long time, they yield a flatter, crispier cookie with more spread. That has something to do with the fat used as well. And sometimes baking at a lower temperature will allow the cookie to spread before rising, so they're more crispy. So I've done that. So those are the things I can suggest, but it's difficult to get a crispy cookie without using sugar. Hi, Kathy. So here's my neighbor, Kathy Gold. And Kathy did a great event with me on vanilla, if you're interested in learning about vanilla. So Kathy's asking, which plant-based butter have I found to be best for browning? Oh, well, that's a great question. So, there are some desserts that call for brown butter, and brown butter it's nutty. It adds a nice flavor, a nice extra layer of flavor to baked goods. So I would say, Kathy, that I think the BioLife butter, which I'm finding really available lately, pretty easily available, that definitely makes brown butter. And also Miyoko's is said to make brown butter as well. So when you make your brown butter, you let it cool and then you go ahead and use it. But brown butter chocolate chip tahini cookies, that sounds delicious. Okay, so this is a very interesting question from Jody C. He wants to know, what exactly is the difference between portion size and serving size? He's been told there is a difference. Who and how is that created? And that really stopped me. Sometimes I get some of your questions ahead, and I thought, yes. For example, In a cookbook, when you're writing a recipe, you don't say how many portions it makes. You say serves X number of people. So here you go, Jody and everyone. Serving size is a standardized amount of food. It may be used to quantify recommended amounts, as is the case with My Plate food group, or represent quantities that people typically consume on a nutrition facts label. You know, we want to read labels. Portion size is the amount of food you choose to eat. So there you have it. I hope that answers your question, Jody. That was a good question. Hi, Margot. How are you? So Margot wants to know, how do you get baking paper in the mold properly? Or do you actually always really just cover the bottom and grease the rest? She struggles with this and gets ugly dents in my cake. Well, we don't want ugly dents. So I use this kind of parchment paper and I fit it. I almost always just use parchment paper in the bottom of my baking pan and grease the sides, and I haven't had a problem. If you need to do the sides, then I would cut a strip and cover it that way. But I find that just using parchment, and that is a must in the bottom of a baking pan, works really well. So Kristen has a question about gluten-free baking and wants to know what's the best flour substitute for cakes instead of wheats. Many of the flours I use are grain-free starches like arrowroot, and they maybe get a little dense and hard. Definitely. Yeah, gluten-free flour mixes. There are so many of them out there. We have one in the course. There are many, and I have a real problem with recipes that say use, for example, 50% whole wheat pastry flour, 50% AP flour, or 1 cup of gluten-free flour. If only it were that simple. The best gluten-free flour mix I have used to date is Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 all-purpose baking flour. It's got a blue label. I find it's flawless and it is complete. So it contains a little bit of xanthan gum. If your mix doesn't include xanthan or guar gum, you're going to have to add some. We have a formula in the course. It's not in my head in this moment. I did buy 2 other mixes. I think one is King Arthur. I forgot what the other one is, and I'm going to try, but I'm really happy with the Bob's. And I do want to say, many of you, I'm sure, have used Bob's Red Mill products. There are many, and they are excellent products. I had the opportunity to meet the man himself several times, and he was a poster boy for healthy living and a lovely man who gave his company when he retired to his employees. And Bob passed away. He died just a few days ago at the age of 84. And I'm confident that his employees who have been running the company will keep it in good stead. And there will be, you know, it's a wonderful company, and he was a wonderful man. So Kathy says she's coming up. Good. Lily T has an interesting question. She wants to know, she's looking for a good substitute for coconut when trying to avoid or minimize saturated fats. She's used cashews, but finds more patients are allergic to them. Well, definitely there are a lot of people who are allergic to nuts, or for real, or think they are allergic to nuts. You don't want to mess around with food allergies. You may have seen in the news not too long ago, a dancer died eating a mislabeled cookie. She knew she couldn't have peanuts. I think it was peanuts. Even was checking the label and Googling ingredients, but the label hadn't been updated. and she died. Her EpiPen wasn't enough. So we want to take this seriously. So there are a couple of things you can try to do. One is not use it, just leave it out. And if it's a coconut flower, for example, you're going to need something else to gather up the moisture. But as you noted, shredded coconut, coarsely ground or chopped nuts can be used for texture, but not if you have a nut allergy. You can try dried fruits or a combination of dried fruits and oats. That could work. And if it's a matter of flavor, I know Chef Shar really likes using coconut extract, so you can try that. So I hope that works for you. Yes, he was 94. I don't know what I said or didn't say that, but Holly's saying that Bob was 94 years old when he passed away. Michelle is looking for tips for storing baking tools, pans, and ingredients in a small kitchen with minimal storage space. Michelle, I would encourage you to look at last month's live event, which was a kitchen tips kind of event, because I recently renovated my kitchen and I've went from having a smaller space to very thoughtful storage now. You know, I've got drawers that pull out full. I would say I love containers. So I got myself a bunch of containers that have places for your hands. You can pick them up. At IKEA, I don't buy all new containers. I reuse boxes. I reuse all kinds of things, jars. You can keep your baking pans in. This is what I said last month. I keep my most used baking pans handy. So I have some up there and I have some on my rolling rack. If you can spare space in your kitchen for a rack, it will hold a lot of your bakeware or your other things. I have several of these. I have one set of less used tools is in a vase that I don't use anymore. Another's in a pitcher. So you can do that. And make sure to only keep what you need. The bulk of my baking pans that I don't use very often because I have too many, and I will someday think about what to do about that, are in another space in my house. They're in a different closet. So you can think about that as well. In terms of ingredients, I like to keep like ingredients with like ingredients. So over here, you can't see it, but I have a cake turntable that I only use once in a while. I have an extra cake pan, and I've got some utensils and ingredients there. So I hope that helps. Okay, thank you. Patrick put the link to the setting up your baking kitchen in the Q&A. That's great. Teresa wants to know, are there special pans and bite-sized cutout utensils that can be purchased? Absolutely. So I think I put them away because I wanted to be neat before my live event, but I have tins of small holiday shaped cutters and other kinds of cutters. I prefer to go into a brick and mortar store when it's possible, because I don't want to have no stores left ever, but you can certainly find them online. Absolutely. I have whole containers of them. I hope that helps. Teresa. Kathy says, I tried to make flowers out of aquafaba. She whipped it until it was very stiff. After I added food coloring, it deflated. Yes, indeed. Aquafaba is particular. It doesn't like things like food coloring, or I don't know, did you use powdered food coloring? It doesn't like that. It doesn't like cocoa powder. So that's my advice, is that it's really hard to do. You just use a little teeny bit. Kristen wants to know, are there any ways to replace butter or vegan butter with oil? Butter has some water in them. Yes, absolutely. Butter has water in them and therefore helps making pockets in baked goods. Kristen, it's a matter of learning vegan technique. My cakes, my everything that I make, nothing is dense unless I want something dense. And I use more oil than I use butter simply because, as I said a little earlier, there was no good vegan butter available. I mean, vegan butter is margarine. It's just, it's not hydrogenated and it's made with better ingredients today. And depending on what you're making, that's how you're going to choose the vegan butter that you're using. But the formula is, when you're replacing dairy butter or vegan butter with oil, use 3/4 of the amount. That's all you need. Aruna, hi Aruna, wants to know what my reasons to be vegan 30 years ago were. Oh, she said, well, thank you. She loves these presentations, but not familiar with my story. So I'm going to give you a very short version of my story. But I was working as a pastry chef. I had gone to culinary school quite a bit later in life. My kids were already in junior high school. And then I got a job as a pastry chef, and I was really happy with this job. I loved it. And my stomach hurt all the time, but I had had stomach aches my whole life. I just thought that's just the way it is. So I had to leave my dream job, and I happened to pick up a book by Dr. Anne-Marie Colbin called Food and Healing. It was the first time I thought about what we ate could affect how we felt. And so I became vegan overnight, although it was pretty much macrobiotic because I didn't know any vegans. And I felt great. I just felt great. Then the other reasons for being vegan, I learned about the animals. You can't unlearn what you start to learn. And I never looked back. And something that's very important, I feel, for me to say is that I never felt deprived. I, in fact, thought that my food choices expanded. There was so much more to eat, than I had been eating. So I really loved that. And I hope that answers your question. Then, the only thing that wasn't really right available for me were desserts, because they were awful 30 years ago. And some of you have heard me say, well, my son said, you're not putting a candle in a baked sweet potato and telling me that's my birthday cake. So I set up a test kitchen, and I just kept going until my tasters, my first breakthrough cake is the chocolate cake to live for, which is still my most requested cake. And this is a double version of it. People have no idea it's vegan. You shouldn't know it's vegan, but I had to learn about vegan products and sweeteners and so on. Thank you for asking, Aruna. Elizabeth says, I don't know. No, she doesn't live near a Whole Foods or natural food store and has trouble sourcing ingredients. Amazon really has most of the, I have feelings about it, but if you are a Prime member, and there is a cost to being a Prime member, you can get your ingredients or anything else without a shipping charge. Elizabeth, why don't you send an email to me, fran@rouxbe.com, and I will send you some sources, because there are sources for natural foods where the variety is very wide and the shipping isn't very, isn't expensive. Diane has a very basic but very important question. She wants to know what makes cane sugar vegan versus regular. And there are a lot of people who don't know the answer. And so table sugar, white sugar that you find in the markets is pure white, and it is refined to 99.9 or 8 or 7%, something like that. And it is actually the only edible substance we put in our mouth that doesn't have to be digested by the saliva in our mouth. It's purely so highly refined. Vegan cane sugar is not pure white, and it is not filtered through bone char, which white sugar is filtered through. So vegan cane sugar, or you might see it as organic cane sugar, you might see it as fair trade. Pretty much they're all vegan sugars. They range from very, very pale beige or tan to a little darker, from very fine to nuts or a little larger crystal, compared with the regular white sugar. And again, they haven't been filtered through bone char, which is one of the steps to making white sugar white. The crystal in a vegan sugar, even the ones that are very fine, and it depends on the manufacturer, is larger than a white sugar crystal. So I lightly grind them and store them labeled before I use them. Thank you for that question. Cynthia wants to know, when it comes to arrowroot or cornstarch slurry, do you have a preference? The desserts look lovely. Well, thank you. It depends on the recipe, Cynthia. I tend to prefer to use arrowroot, but there are some recipes that need cornstarch. I use organic cornstarch. That I do. For example, chocolate pudding made with arrowroot is going to be slimy. There's got to be another stringy. I think that's the culinary word, is stringy. Doesn't work. When you're cooking your arrowroot slurry, it thickens just under the boil. If you keep cooking it, it's going to thin out. Cornstarch has to be cooked for about a minute. So that's the answer to that. Diane wants to know, are there brands of chocolate that I prefer? Oh my gosh. There are so many brands of vegan chocolate today that, and it's just exploding. So we all have different palates. You're gonna have to do some tasting, because what I think tastes good might not taste good to you at all. What you want to make sure, though, is your recipe, a well-written recipe for ganache, for example, should say that the percentage is 70 to 72% or 68 to whatever. That matters. But I like supermarket brands. I like Valrhona. These containers are all full. Whole Foods has a brand of organic vegan chocolate that's very nice. So does Trader Joe's. Choco Love. Dr. Brown, the new thing in chocolate now is milk chocolates, and they aren't dairy milk, of course, but some are. I've tasted some that I didn't prefer at all. I have to say, awful, but that's, subjective. And some that are delicious. Dr. Bronner, the soap people, has a milk chocolate. I think the label makes it look like a bar of soap, but they're delicious. It's a milk chocolate. And also there's a milk chocolate, an Israeli company called Seventh Heaven that's in the United States now, that's really delicious. Theo from Seattle is no longer owned by the founding family, but they make a really nice vegan chocolate. And if you need one that is certified gluten-free, there are a couple. One of them is Enjoy Life. I don't think the quality of their chocolate's great, but it is certified gluten-free. So with chocolate, you want to, like anything else, you want to read the label and make sure you know what you're getting. But if dairy is more than an annoyance for you, you want to pick a chocolate manufacturer that only makes dark chocolate, because the first few runs of a chocolate that's made on shared equipment is going to have dairy in it. And Susan wants to know, if I prefer one type of non-dairy milk over the other. It depends on what I'm making. I tend to use oat milk, and I like Oatly the best. The reason that I like it is it has a nice amount of protein, and fat for desserts, and also because, I was saying earlier, or someone brought up about nut allergies. I'm considering people who are allergic to nuts, so that's going to leave out almond milk, cashew milk, macadamia nut milk. Rice milk is very thin. It's like skim milk, really. I use it occasionally, but not for my cakes. And I don't care for a container of coconut milk beverage. I will use coconut milk sometimes. So I hope that helps. Yeah, I'm an oat milk person. I want to thank you. That was the last question, and we are right on time. I want to thank you all for coming today and joining me here in my home kitchen. I had a really good time. I enjoyed your questions. I want to wish you, again, a happy Galentine's Day, a happy Valentine's Day coming up. I know 2 people who have Valentine's birthdays, so I'll be making something for them. And I hope to see you next month at my March live event. February. This year is just flying. So take care, everyone. Be well. Stay healthy. Be happy. Take care of each other. I hope to see you again soon. Bye.